All right, guys, Murph's here. And today we're going to talk about this. A 300 Blackout SBR built on an Aero Precision receiver set that I have affectionately termed my Splenda Gerbil, which is a play on words for the rifle that I base this off of, the Honey Badger, and then also its cheaper version, the Sugar Weasel. Now, eagle-eyed viewers of the channel will note that I have previously reviewed this rifle. So if you're looking for the nitty-gritty on all the different pieces and parts and why it is that I chose what it is that I did and all those types of things, check out the link in the description. That'll take you back to the original video and then come back here. Today, we're doing a revisit, talking about things that I've changed about the rifle, as well as some updates on its performance. All right, so with that, eagle-eyed viewers of the channel will also note that I have swapped out the iron sights on this particular rifle. Originally, I had PRI fixed iron sights. It's set up for absolute co-witness. And I never really liked that sight setup. Well, why did you go with that then, Murph? Well, this was my COVID baby. I built this during the lockdowns and all that kind of stuff. And at that time, ammunition, firearms, and firearms accessories were incredibly hard to come by, and that included iron sights. So the PRI wound up being the best quality sights available at a price that I was willing to pay. Because that's always my cost-benefit analysis, but that played a really hefty part then because prices were kind of all over the place. I wanted flip-up sights on this originally. Now, the PRIs weren't bad. They had kind of like an HK type appearance to them, a post in the front sight protected by a hood and all that kind of stuff. And they were fairly decent sights. I just didn't like how convoluted my sight picture was trying to get a hold of the red dot in this Aimpoint Pro. So I ran with those for a little while. I did a couple competitions with this rifle set up in the way that it was, and then I finally got around to updating it. And I went back and forth on how it was that I was going to change these sights for a little while. They're good sights. I just feel like they would run better as dedicated sights instead of as backups. That's not to say that fixed irons don't necessarily have a place as backup sights. I think I would prefer them in a lower 1/3 co-witness as opposed to absolute co-witness, but to each their own on that. So what I wound up doing, because I have another project here in the chute, which is coming up for review here shortly, that I had folding irons on and decided that it didn't need those folding irons anymore. That freed those up. So then I took the PRIs, put them onto my Maverick 88 truck shotgun, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check the link in the description. And then put these sights on here. Now these are Ruger flip-up sights, which I just realized that all of my flip-up sights are Rugers. I don't know how that happened. That was not by design, that's for sure. Now, I have made the statement previously that these are kind of like Ruger's copy of Magpul sights, and someone was like, they're not even slightly the same, which they have the same overall construction. They have appearance. They might have sight adjustments done in a different manner, but they attach to the rails in the same way. It's pretty typical for Ruger. Ruger copies a lot of other people. In this case, I would say Ruger copied Magpul, especially since Magpul came out first. So now I have a much lower profile, more snag-free type setup. The optic is still a snag point, but that's okay. I'm willing to accept that snag point. I don't have additional sharp corners available to catch onto things. And seeing as this is a kind of confined space type weapon system, that's kind of important to me, especially since this is like a truck gun, which if you're interested in my truck gun concept, link in the description. Now, some people get really irritated about these sights. They state that they first off should be made of steel, and then also they should lock in the upright position. I don't consider either of those very important because these are not my sole sighting system. If I was only fighting with iron sights, yes, I would have a lot more expectation for what these sights would be able to do. I would have stuck with the PRIs if I was just going to stick with using iron sights on this rifle. But I wanted to run an optic, and I wanted to be able to make sure that I optimized running an optic on this rifle because I have so much rail space to begin with. That's why I moved them onto the other weapon system. These are backup sights. I don't have the same expectations out of backup sights that I have for primary fighting sights. And that's because I expect to be using these very rarely. And when you get into the overall cost-benefit analysis of like how much money it is that you're going to spend versus how much time you're actually going to use something, which is money that could be spent elsewhere, you got to be pretty critical about that. Yes, it would be great if these were locking and they were made of steel and stuff like that, and I do have sights that are like that. And they're great sights. I would not change anything about those. But that doesn't mean that all of them have to be that way. And if that's money that takes away from your training fund or your ammunition fund, or makes you wind up having to get a less good optic that you're actually going to be working with most of the time, I would sooner see you go with what are considered to be cheap, crappy sights, as opposed to backup sights, as opposed to having a crappy optic that you're actually going to be working with all the time. And there's a back and forth that's associated with that, but that's how I evaluate that decision, at least for myself overall. So now I have a nice clear sight picture to be able to work around. I super appreciate that. I did have to move back my Magpul sling swivel because now these sights are taking up more space on the rail, which this hasn't necessarily caused any issue with my weapon mounted light. Now this is still the Insight WMLX, which has a night vision capability. I wish it had a momentary function as opposed to being constant on, but it's fine. I'll get over it. At some point, I'll probably wind up swapping this light out anyway. I've been primarily running Streamlights and Surefires. Now, long-term testing, there's been some discussion that these lights are not as durable as a steel frame light. This does have a plastic housing. However, I don't do destructive testing on the channel, and in the course of using this, I've had no issues with reliability out of this light. As we can see, it still functions and it does everything it is that it's supposed to do. Let's talk about this Strike Industries PDW stock real quick. I've had any issues with this. I have one slight issue with this stock, and that is that I have a very small amount of surface area to contact with it. That's fine for its intended purpose, and the whole theme with this rifle is conscious trade-off. So I wanted something that was very slim, very small, very compact. This is 23.75 inches overall for legal length. Just under 2 feet once you take into account like the muzzle device and the full extension of the stock and all that kind of stuff. But this is something that I wanted to be able to fit into a backpack, to be able to handle effectively inside of a vehicle and all that kind of stuff. And that does necessitate smaller features, more compact features, including this buttstock. I would not necessarily trade this off, but it does make you appreciate having a full-size buttstock on a fighting rifle. And the biggest issue being getting that nice repeatable contact in your shoulder to be able to build your steady position and all that kind of stuff, be able to get on your sight and everything like that. Sometimes it can be a little problematic, but it's not been something that I felt like has held me back. It's just something you got to train for and work around. Okay, so there's the stock. What else have we got to talk about? As far as the longevity of the internal parts and stuff like that, I found no additional damage, which is something that you have to take into account whenever it is that you're talking about shorter barrel systems. There's a lot more back pressure and stuff like that. It can cause more wear and tear on the parts. I've been checking the upper to see how the cam pin's doing. If it's like chewing away at my upper or anything like that, the damage hasn't gotten any worse than what I guess you could call initial break-in more or less necessitated. What about this barrel length? How do I feel about this V7 6.5 inch barrel? I still absolutely love this thing. Now, a lot of people, whenever I break this out, automatically start to cringe because they're convinced that this is going to have like a ton of muzzle blast and muzzle flash and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know why. Normally, whenever you talk about 300 Blackout, everyone immediately, without fail, goes, well, you know, 9 inches is the optimum barrel length for 300 Blackout. Why didn't you go with 9 inches? Well, because I wanted something smaller. Wow, that was easy. Everyone spends so much time talking about optimal barrel length for 300 Blackout, but no one ever really discusses optimal barrel length for 5.56. Optimal barrel length for a 5.56 is 20 inches, but everyone's got a 16-inch, well, anyone who's got AR-15s probably has a 16-inch barreled AR-15 in their closet. But we're fine with that conscious trade-off there. Why does that not work the same for 300 Blackout? I'm 2.5 inches shorter. I did the research before I picked this gun, before I picked this barrel length and all that kind of stuff. 300 Blackout, in my opinion, is made for suppressor hosts and short-barreled rifles. You still get a good relationship with velocity and all that kind of stuff. As long as you stick with the supers, I don't like how the velocity dips with the heavy grain ammunition. But if you're talking about using suppressor and all that kind of stuff, there's your conscious trade-off yet again. When it comes to muzzle blast, it's not that bad. When it comes to muzzle flash, it's not that bad. When it comes to recoil, it's not that much. This rifle performs exceedingly well. It's very easy to transition through targets. It's very easy to be able to get follow-up shots and all that kind of stuff. I've had no issues. I have no regrets when it comes to this barrel length. Okay. Well, I think that pretty much covers all the things, all the impressions that I've had over the years of shooting this rifle when it comes to working with it. Like this thing has been an absolute joy in competitions on close range targets and stuff like that. And I pushed it out to 200 and 300 yards. How's it been shooting? All right, let's talk about this. First off, reliability. I've had two malfunctions out of this rifle. One was a stuck cartridge casing, a failure to eject, and I was actually really surprised by that. That's something that I've been watching for and dreading with this particular rifle, because we are talking about short barrels, not a whole lot of dwell time and all that kind of stuff, very highly pressurized gas systems, which at 9 inches, maybe less concerned about. As we do diminish barrel length, we do have to be worried a little bit more about the pressurization of the gas system. And this is not readily adaptable because of the proprietary gas block to an adjustable gas block. So I kind of got what I got unless I go to an adjustable bolt, which I don't want to do. So when that happened, I was a little bit alarmed. I built this rifle around steel-cased ammunition though. So I have an increased power extractor springs and all that kind of stuff. And if I run into any issues, I will upgrade to LMT's lobster tail extractor on their bolt system. That was the original plan for this rifle. It wasn't available at the time that I wanted to buy it though, so I just went with a standard bolt head and, from right to bare arms, and added the extra power springs. I've always been worried that the extra power springs on the same surface area could cause a separation of the cartridge lip. In this case, just for whatever reason, that round skipped the extractor for some reason, and I was able to get it out fairly easily. That was on brass cased ammunition. It was reloads though that I had picked up. So I've had zero issues when it comes to steel cased ammunition, which I'm still surprised about today, except for about 2 weeks ago I was shooting this rifle. It was very cold out, and I had on the first magazine a failure to lock to the rear, which, while maybe not necessarily the most drastic malfunction you could have out there, it is still technically a malfunction. So those are the two malfunctions I've had out of this rifle thus far. Okay, how has it been when it comes to like drills and all that kind of stuff? Well, I not too long ago shot this doing some failure to stop, also known as Mozambique drills. And I actually shot it in two different ways. I shot it doing it in the hammer style and then also in the more consistent style. What's the difference? So hammer pairs are when you come up and you rip off 2 rounds pretty quickly. Whereas control pairs would be bang, reacquire target, bang. You can still do that fairly quickly, but the idea of a hammer drill is you're kind of feathering that trigger a little bit. If you do that in a hammer drill, you're going to have a pause between that second round and then as you transition up to the head, firing that third shot into the head. If you do it in what I consider to be the more consistent style, you go bang, bang, bang. You keep that cadence, bang, 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 all the way through. Whatever speed it is that you're going at, you maintain that cadence for all 3 rounds, regardless of where you are at in the target sequence. If you're doing hammer style, you're engaging 2 to the chest, you evaluate that those 2 rounds did not do what you wanted them to do, and then you transition to the head. That makes sense. Basically, you expect to only engage center mass unless you come across somebody who has body armor or for some reason has decided to be resistant to bullets that day. If you do it in the way that I've more classically been taught, it's because you are planning on doing Mozambiques all the time because you are expecting to be engaging people who are also wearing body armor. So you're going after the readily available center mass target and then transitioning to the head to finish it off. 6 of one, half a dozen of another. When it comes to that, this rifle transitions through it beautifully in both methods. The groups were maybe a little bit wider than I would want them to be, but that could be more that I haven't necessarily been doing a lot of rifle training lately. Most of my stuff's been centered towards pistol, so that could be more me than the gun. But when it came to the cadence kind of methodology, the consistent cadence all the way throughout the engagement, 0 issues. How do I feel about this vertical grip as opposed to a angle grip? I actually, in general, prefer vertical grips. It gives me options on how it is I want to build my hand. But actually, Travis Haley made a comment on a Grand Thumb video some years ago that on short setups, he prefers vertical grips because it allows him to get more stable with the system. Now, it's a short system, so yes, I'm not going to be able to C-clamp and do all those types of classic positioning, not just because of the amount of surface area I had to be able to put my accessories and all that kind of stuff, but also it's just on short setups like this, it's even more scrunched and uncomfortable and actually doesn't help shooting. There's too much tension in your body at that point. Whereas being able to grab this vertical grip allows me to lose some of that tension and get a little bit more relaxed in what it is that I'm doing. All right, guys. What about accuracy? In checking the previous footage from that first video, I realized I never rolled in any 100-yard accuracy for that rifle. We only talked about 50-yard accuracy. Now, based off of the 50-yard accuracy, which was about half an inch to just to like right around 1.5 inches, we could extrapolate that we would expect between a little bit more than 1 to 3 inch groups with this rifle. So imagine my surprise when I turned in this 6.5 inch group at 100 yards. Consistently. This was not the only target that came out like this. I shot it multiple times because I'm like, there's no way. There's no way. This rifle's far better than that. Now, I guess a couple things to take into account. It is a short barrel. I am running a red dot. This rifle accuracy was evaluated in the manner that the rifle is configured, as it always is on the channel. This is kind of going to sound like an excuse parade, but it's really not, because I still consider that I need to be able to get the best accuracy that I can out of whatever system it is that I'm using. And 6.5 inches is not within my accuracy standard. Something that I noticed about the ammunition that I was shooting was 155 grain ammunition from Precision 1, which I've never really heard of that company. I picked up that ammo years ago because it happened to be for a good price at a time when ammunition was absolutely insane. And I noticed that the projectiles had this kind of weird, like kind of almost bulbous, blunted nose to them. They did not perform all that hot, and I feel like this rifle is capable of doing much better than this. The ammunition that was previously tested out of this at 50 yards was Winchester Deer Season XP, which, I mean, that is a little bit more of a premium bullet, but I don't want to reshoot that because that's also my defensive load, and I'm not looking to dip into a bunch of my defensive loads while we're at this. So I do have some other FMJs around. I am going to try them out. I have some other 300 Blackout ammunition. Hopefully I'll get a chance to get back out to the range before I post this video with this rifle in order to try to get some better accuracy results out of it. Because right now, 6.5 inches, this is the worst accuracy result I've turned in for any rifle that I've reviewed, with the possible exception of the Mauser 98K for the World War II rifle comparison series, which if you're interested in that, I'll throw the link in the description. That rifle had trouble getting all 5 rounds on paper, so I just quit trying to even group it at that point. So I guess technically that one did worse, but we're going to go ahead and have it self-select for, it's almost like no contest type of deal. It's like they didn't even show up to the fight. This thing, that's the worst, and I'm unwilling to accept that. So hopefully I'll get an opportunity to be able to roll in more accuracy results. Otherwise, I've run 200 grain ammunition through this, 145 grain Barnaul, the 150 grain Deer Season XP. I believe that was 180 grain reloads that I shot that one time. And then these 155 grain precision ones, which I don't think I'll ever buy those again if I can avoid it. All right, guys, that is shooting. What recommendations do I have when it comes to a rifle of this pattern or size? We're not necessarily talking about a manufactured item. We're talking about something that I put together. So what do I think its applications would be? Do I consider this to be a good option for duty type use? If your department allows you to build your own rifle, building something in this pattern wouldn't be that bad. If not, buying something in this pattern wouldn't necessarily be that bad. Like I said before, I think 300 Blackout is perfect for short rifles and suppressor hosts. And this would make a fantastic suppressor host. I haven't gotten around to putting a suppressor on it yet. Suppressor wait times are just so all over the place, and I hate it because I'm not a very patient man. When I pay for something, I want it. Like, I'm that guy who orders something off of Amazon and then goes and sits in front of the front door like it's going to just magically appear. But having this short setup already and then adding a suppressor would really, like, you're not going to necessarily compromise your overall size comparison as opposed to going with a 16-inch gun and then throwing a suppressor on it. That's a lot of barrel at that point. It's going to be very difficult to work in confined spaces. This will still be effective in confined spaces with a suppressor on it. Now, it is going to change your pressure, your back pressure, and all that kind of stuff. And that's just something you're going to have to take into account. Play around with some things, see what it is that you've got going on when it comes to kind of timing the system, so to speak. So I think a 300 Blackout SBR would be absolutely fantastic for duty type application. What about home defense, self-defense? Well, this is a self-defense option for me. I take this on road trips whenever the ATF approves my 5320.20s in time, which doesn't seem to happen very often. I'm getting a little irritated about it. I put in a request for transport like 2 months ago, and I still haven't gotten it back. Getting pretty annoyed. The last one that I sent them, they also approved after the start of travel. And you're technically supposed to have that letter in hand before you start travel, if you're going to take an SBR with you. For home defense, it kind of depends on the home. If you live in an apartment or something like that, I would not recommend this or really any other rifle in that case. If you have family members spread out all over the house, I would not necessarily recommend this. The possibility of pass-through and all that kind of stuff is too high. It's not something that I would want to risk. If you live on your own and you live pretty widely spaced from your neighbors, this would be a fantastic home defense option, especially if you're expecting to come out of your place of safety and start pine corners and all that kind of stuff. This would be an absolute monster. Or if your home defense strategy supports that. So in my case, the bedrooms are clustered pretty closely that I would be able to effectively put myself in between any family member and danger to be able to utilize this rifle freely. So this still works into my home defense strategy if necessary. Okay, what about competition use? Now, though I've used this as a competition, or I've used this rifle in competition, it was more to get practice with my rifle than it was because this thing's a really fantastic competition gun. Now, it's reached out to 200 and 300 yards for me, and it has done fantastic in close range type stuff. It would do well in the competition type function, but I think a larger gun that you can get more spread out on, you can get your C-clamp and all that kind of stuff and really drive the rifle to get faster splits and all that kind of stuff would be more advantageous than this rifle specifically, especially at the cost of 300 Blackout. Also keep that in mind. What about as a hunting rifle? In a lot of places, this is not a legal hunting rifle. You can get magazines that are the proper capacity, and the 300 Blackout round would be a fantastic hunting cartridge on deer or pig or whatever. But some places have barrel restrictions, like where I live now, you have a barrel length restriction, and this rifle would not be legal for hunting. So you got to keep that in mind. What about as like a woods gun, though? It wouldn't be bad. I don't think the woods necessarily require you to have a very compact rifle in order to be able to function effectively out there, but it wouldn't hurt anything either. So kind of, again, the cartridge is still effective. Now, if you're going up against bears, it probably wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, but it may not necessarily be the worst choice either. All right, what are my uses for this gun? Well, as I mentioned before, this is still a truck gun for me. This is still a defensive option for me, and I feel very confident with it overall. One of the great things about going with the 300 Blackout is that as energy diminishes, you have to start to rely more and more on mass. And seeing as my defensive loads for this rifle are 150 grain deer season XP, I have 3 times the mass of a 5.56 round. A little under 3 times the mass of a 5.56 round. So sick. I may not necessarily get all the best velocity out of that. That's kind of flirting the edge of supersonic and subsonics, but having retained that mass, I'm still going to cause a lot of effect on my target. And if 300 Blackout prices ever come down to where it makes it feasible for me to consistently buy 110 or 125 grain supersonics, don't even have to worry about that anymore. Still have more mass. At 125 grain, I'm flirting around with the mass of a 7.62 by 3.9 and a cartridge that is more efficient when it comes to giving me velocity in the same overall length. All right, what are some competitive options out there on the market? What are some recommendations that I would make? Well, if you want to go the ultra expensive, you can always go with the Q Honey Badger. And then you get the Cherry Bomb muzzle device, you get their adjustable gas block, and all the cost that's associated with it. If you're wanting to go with something a little cheaper, but still more expensive than what I have put into this rifle, you might look at the SIG, oh my goodness, the SIG Rattler, which is about an inch shorter than this gun, is a very popular option. My biggest issue with the Rattler is the handguard. There is not a lot of space to put stuff on that handguard. There's like no space to put stuff on that handguard. And some of that is also because they have a cutout for their gas port adjustment, which SIG has done on all of their like MCX style rifles, and I really don't like it. On the 16-inch guns, it's like right where I want to put my hand, or like right where I want to mount a light or something along those lines, which is the case on a buddy of mine's. But then when you go to the already very short rail, very condensed space, it just takes up just a little bit more space. So it makes it more difficult to mount lights, which this gun, like I've already pretty much used up all the real estate I can to be able to mount the accessories that I have on it. Imagine switching that over to a Rattler where you have even less. So as far as utilizing that as a defensive tool, there's some definite drawbacks, but it's a little more compact, might better fit into your strategy in that way. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.